ladies and gentlemen, to talk on the Data Privacy Act, a round of applause for Attorney J.J. Dissini. JJ, ito kaya.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Actually, hindi na rin na-mention dun sa intro ko, but I also teach. I've been teaching at the UP College of Law for the last, it's going to be about 18 years this year, in June. And the bar exams came out today. And the number one in the bar is somebody from Bacolod, a school in Bacolod. I think Saint De La Salle Law School in Bacolod. So congratulations. And if I'm not mistaken, the top 10 dominated by, I think Ateneo de Davao was in the top 10. The reason why hindi ako familiar kasi ang UP, parang isa lang ata nakapasok sa amin. And then they announced, usually they only announce top 10. This year they announced up to top 20. Tapos number 19 kami. So parang buti lang, umabot ng 20, kundi wala kami talaga. Shout out. Anyway, I'm also, I realized this as I was coming in, that I'm also a user of Moodle because the UP University Virtual Learning Environment runs on Moodle. It's powered by Moodle. And I'm trying to think now, about maybe 8 years ago, I started deploying an online quiz for my law students as part of their daily torture. Weekly. And the torture is this. So law students, my view is they have to memorize provisions of law. And I would prefer that they memorize certain passages in these provisions of law. So I set up, it took me a semester to do it because I was doing it myself. I would get a provision of law, I would take out words, and I set it up as a Moodle quiz. And so normally when you say that, people are aghast and sabi na, that's so unfair, right? Fill in the blanks. Right? And it doesn't seem to have any educational value. And the first time I did it, sabi ko, sige, I'll be very unreasonable. Just as an experiment. Sabi ko sa students ko, I told my students, you take the online quiz, right? And it has to be the correct word because if it's not the correct word, the system cannot detect it as a correct answer. You add a space, it will be a mistake. It has to be exactly the correct word. Fill in the blank quizzes. And then I told them, the threshold to pass it is 90%. As a joke. But of course, straight face. I knew as the semester wore on, I would adjust it lower. You would be surprised. About 95% of my students, 97% of my students, they meet that threshold. They take it more than once. I give them 3 tries or 4 tries in a semester. Meaning you take a quiz, you can only take it for a certain time period, but you're allowed to take it 4 times. And actually now, I raised it to 95%, and I'm still hitting those numbers. So I'm really surprised at, I think, the effectiveness of the tool. I'm a believer in allowing quizzes being taken again. In fact, I read a New York Times article a few years ago where it said that if you take a quiz, if a student takes a quiz twice or even 3 times, so long as he understands where he made a mistake, he will do better in the quiz because he understands where he makes a mistake and they learn from that. And I've always believed that. In other words, I'm a big supporter of Moodle, and I think it's an important part of and in the college now, our new dean is looking at curricular reform, and I'm pushing actually Moodle as these types of MCQ, for example, as alternative learning environments. Okay, so slides. Where are my slides? There you go. So we're talking about Data Privacy Act. Has anybody heard about the Data Privacy Act? Okay, good. Smattering of So this is a law that applies to everyone. And unlike in other countries, you violate the Data Privacy Act, and it's a criminal offense, and it's a crime that can be committed by any of us. I look at this room and I understand, I looked at the statistics of the attendees. It's about half and half educators, half and half administrators. And privacy is a strange topic in the sense that if you ask somebody what privacy is, or define privacy, people can't define it. They know what it is. You know what privacy is, but you can't define it. Diba? And this is the topics that you see here are the different ways in which the law treats privacy. And it's very, very broad. No? Something as, on the one end, it's about search warrants, and on the other spectrum, it's contraceptives or the right to terminate a pregnancy. So there are three kinds of ways to understand privacy. One is, at least as far as the law is concerned, no? The first is the right to privacy in physical spaces. Anywhere where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, the state, no, the government cannot enter that space without a warrant. To a certain degree, you have a right to privacy, for example, in your office. And this has been applied by the Supreme Court even against your employer. If your employer gives you exclusive access to certain parts of your workspace, you can reasonably expect that your area is private. Your employer may not enter that space without violating your right to privacy. Okay? The second type of privacy is decisional privacy. And this is between the state, between the government and the individual. There are certain decisions that an individual can make that the state should not get involved in, has no business getting involved in. And this was first enunciated in a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. And in that case, it involved the use by married couples of contraceptives. Right? So in Connecticut, it was a crime for married people to use contraceptives. And so the U.S. Supreme Court said, in order for the police to enforce that law, it would require policemen to stand in the bedroom and to figure out, right, what married people were doing. And that they considered to be an invasion of privacy. So decisional privacy has, one of the extremes of that is the decision, right, of a woman to terminate a pregnancy. This is Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade was decided in part on a woman's exercise of a right to privacy. So right to privacy includes the right to choose who your spouse is. There was this case called, appropriately called Loving versus Virginia, where a white man married a black woman, and it was a crime in Virginia to do that. And they were convicted, and they had the conviction overturned. The Supreme Court struck down that statute. Okay, and the third kind of privacy is data or informational privacy. And what this involves are certain pieces of what they call personally identifiable information. Any piece of information that you can link to an identity, right? And what you're saying is that, wherever you go, actually, you're doing this all the time. This is a stupid question to ask, but who here is a user of Facebook? Come on, this is the Philippines. We're the social media capital of the world. Di ba? Did you know that thing about Cambridge Analytica? You've been hearing about it. That was amazing because according to their statistics, only 550 Filipinos played that game. You know how much data they got? Because if I played that game, Cambridge Analytica, eventually got the data, not only my data, but the data of my Facebook friends. Okay. Out of 550 Filipinos who played the game, do you know how many Filipinos were affected? Meaning how much data they were able to get from 550? 1 million. Which means that it's true. The average Filipino user does have 2,000 friends. Diba? And unique friends, diba? Kasi there was no overlap between those 550 people and the 1 million users. I mean, this is Facebook telling us that this is what happened to our data. And every time you use Facebook, you're exercising your right to privacy. Why? You are disclosing information about yourself, right? Whenever you post. Sometimes you disclose other people's information. And that leads to cases. So that's a different topic. But you deal with it. You're interested in other people's personal information. And in a sense, that's what you do, even on a daily basis. When even choosing what you wear, like I wore this thing today so that I look professional, right? I could have worn a T-shirt and I don't know, shorts and flip-flops, and it communicates something else. What I wear discloses information about me. When I was introduced earlier, it said things about my qualifications. That's an exercise of right to privacy. I'm sharing information. Sometimes, sabi nga ni Donald Trump, fake news, di ba? Some people, and a lot of people are actually are good at that. No? They build up they cultivate an image to others. And that's part of your right to exercise of your right to privacy. You do that because you want to regulate relationships. For example, for especially the younger people, if you're a mother and you have a teenager child, right? A teenage child, he or she is only pretending to be on Facebook. Because these children, they've already left Facebook. They're already on Instagram. Because all their parents are on Facebook. And that's in a sense, no? That's an exercise of a right to privacy. Also, I mean, I guess when you were younger, you regulate what information your mother knows about you, right? So there are things that your mother will never know about you. You do that as a way to regulate your relationship. Also, for your friends, closer friends, you disclose more personal information. Acquaintances, you disclose less information. So all of us actually exercise our right to privacy. And in the Philippines, we enacted the Data Privacy Act. And this is my what do you call this? What's that? It's a meme. It's not a meme. It's an infographic, my infographic for the Data Privacy Act. Okay, so who is protected by the Data Privacy Act? The data subject, and it's always people, okay? So not corporations, not partnerships, people are protected by the Data Privacy Act. Now, what is protected? What is protected is our personal or information or personal data. Any information that can be linked to your identity. There's a certain class of data called sensitive personal information involving your health, for example, or political beliefs. Those are protected to a higher degree. Now, what activity is regulated? Processing of personal information. That includes collecting of personal information and processing it. Now, there are two kinds of entities that are regulated, a data controller and a data processor. And the difference between them is that a data controller decides when to collect and when to process personal information. A data processor only follows the instruction of somebody else. Okay. So as educators, actually, so what the law says is that in order for a data controller or a data processor to process personal information, you need to get the consent of the data subject. Okay, and consent must follow a specific form. Okay, and there are requirements in the law. And then you need to respect, of course, the rights of the data subject. Now, as a teacher, actually, you collect personal information all the time, right? You may be collecting, for example, you're a teacher, you recognize that a child seems to be not performing well, and you get this impression that maybe this child is suffering from either depression or whatever, right? And what do? You tell the guidance counselor, maybe you need to intervene here, right? And then, so the guidance counselor pulls the child in, or maybe administration informs the parents. What just happened? What happened is might have collected sensitive personal information of the child, processed it by transferring it to another person, to the guidance counselor. The guidance counselor transfers it on. Now, if consent of the child has not been procured, or consent of the parent of the child has not been procured, theoretically, the parents could say, this is a violation of the Data Privacy Act. And this could happen, this could be more, imagine a situation where the parents were offended, right? Offended by the fact that you thought, right, that the child was depressed. Or that you thought that the child suffers from ADHD. Diba? What you're so as an educator, your objective is something that's good for the child, but the parents might take it the wrong way. They have a right under the Data Privacy Act to initiate a criminal action against you for processing personal information without consent. So this is why all entities now, all schools need to get need to have a data privacy compliance program, and we're running out of time. So you need to protect the rights of the data subject. Before data is collected from you, you have to be informed what your rights are. You have to be informed what data will be collected, how it will be used, why it's being used. You can have access to your data, your personal information. So if you wonder what data your bank has about your credit card company, you can get it. Okay, and you can sue for damages. So this is just a brief of the compliance process. So you do a gap analysis, what the National Privacy Commission has a privacy impact assessment. And then you do a compliance by either getting consent or not getting consent. It depends on you. You need to come up with a data privacy notice. Ateneo just posted theirs, I think a few weeks ago. It's in public places now, and I think they posted it everywhere. I saw that. So you need to appoint a data protection officer in your company, and then you need to register, in your school. And if you have more than, say, 1,500 students, you need to register your data protection system. So in a nutshell, that's the sort of the requirements that you have. Now think about where you're processing personal information in the school. Administration, admissions, right? It means the grades, right? I forget what it's called. Registrar's office, correct? You're collecting information, you're processing. When somebody comes in the door, parang background investigator, asking for a certification of who your graduates are, you are processing that information. You're processing that person's personal information. And under the law now, as a general rule, you have to get consent. And it can be very difficult, especially if you're dealing with people like alumni who are not there anymore necessarily, to sign a consent form. So it's quite a daunting task, and I'm sure a lot of schools are faced with a lot of anxiety with respect to the Data Privacy Act. And I think I'll end there, and we'll open for questions. Do we have time? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, JJ. Please stay in the lectern while we collect some questions for you to answer. I have one here right now. Oh, before anything else, I would like to apologize for not having been able to mention that you are a professorial lecturer of the Philippine Judicial Academy, and I'm very proud to say the UP Open University, no, where you used to teach media law, right?
Yes,
Okay.
actually.
And that's where...
And actually, my wife is the lawyer for Open University.
For the Open University,
for the last,
correct.
I think, 10 years or so.
Kaya Moodle pa rin ho siya, no?
Yes.
Our question, and I would imagine, I would wager that this question comes from a government employee. How would you reconcile the Data Privacy Act to the free access to a government employee's statement of assets and liabilities and net worth, SALN?
So that's very, very good question. So the answer to that question is there's an exception in the law that says that personal information necessary for the performance of a public function is not included in the law. I argue that SALN should be publicly accessible. However, each agency, it seems, has taken their own policy. The Supreme Court, for example, said that the SALNs of judges and justices are confidential, and I think the House of Representatives also has taken that position. But as a general rule, actually, they should be public information. That's the reason why you disclose your statement of assets and liabilities and net worth, so that people can examine. The idea of SALN is that you give up your right to privacy, because that's the price you pay for becoming a public employee, diba? Because the people have a right to know whether or not you're enriching yourself at the expense of taxpayers' money. So.
Okay. So that's clear. Now another question is that has there been any exciting jurisprudence on the Data Privacy Act? Could you share this with us? What's the most okay.
In the Philippines, wala pa. But when you think about Data Privacy Act, so think about Cambridge Analytica and think about Facebook, right? What happened there is technically a crime in the Philippines, right? Because what happened is Facebook got your data, and Facebook did not comply with the way to get your consent. They didn't. If you read the Facebook consent form, it doesn't tell you with detail. They didn't tell you that your data could be not just your data, but then your friend's data could be used by Facebook and sold to a third party. There was this big, and I think what was troubling about the Facebook event was that the position of Facebook was that we're compliant with the law, which is true, because the data privacy law, the type of that we have, is not the same laws they have in the United States. The regimes that are strict in data privacy law are those that exist in Europe. And our law is more aligned with the European regime. So it's interesting to see, even to examine, watching Zuckerberg, because he was asked, are you willing to change your business model? And he wasn't answering, because he knows that's his business model. His business model is he takes data, and then they monetize it by selling it to others. And apparently that's exactly what happened in the Cambridge Analytica. And I think what was worrisome about Cambridge Analytica is that apparently we were the subject of manipulation, that they would serve up, right, with particularity, predicting who you are. They could serve up videos on your timeline that could influence you one way or the other in order to vote. And that's what Cambridge Analytica's business was. Now, what's funny is that no one is concerned about this, because no one here, I will bet, closed their Facebook page. Did anyone close their Facebook page because of Cambridge Analytica? Let's show of hands. No one, not even me. Well, I deleted Facebook on my phone. But Yung ano, on your phone, if you have Messenger, so you have Messenger on your phone, who has Messenger on your phone? I have Messenger on my phone. Do you know what it does? It reads all your, it grabs all your call data. It grabs all your SMS data. It does, and uploads it all to Facebook servers. And as far as Facebook is concerned, you consented to that when you agreed to the terms of conditions. I know some people who've deleted Messenger from their phones. So the funny thing about privacy is that I think it's so abstract. It's like global warming. You know it's happening, but until you see the waves crashing on your front door, right, you feel it's not going to affect you. Do you know, the Philippines was at the time that it happened, Comelec. You've all heard of Comelec, right? At the time that it happened, we were the world record. Most number of data records disclosed. 55 million individuals, 70 million, iba, Philippines, go Philippines. Nobody was concerned. It wasn't until that site came out, yung whereismydata.net. Do you remember that site? You enter your name. Anybody enter their name? And then makikita mo yung data mo. If you entered your name, then now the hackers not only know that it's you, they link your name now to an IP address. So even you looking at the site is a way for other people to get data about you. So that was a huge data. You know that I can make fake IDs based on that database because I know your name, I know your address, I know your mother's name, I know all your relatives. I can pretend to be you, really, and no one is concerned because it's abstract. Until we see true identity theft arising from Comelec, I think privacy is something that now becomes a compliance issue. So that's the way we have to think about it. We have to comply with the Data Privacy Act because we need to have a culture where we need to be protective of people's rights. Because I think people they're not in tune yet with their privacy rights, but they know that if it's been violated, they feel very bad. And I think that's the challenge of the Data Privacy Act, is that let's comply, let's get consent, let's be open and transparent about the way we use personal information. And hopefully we can have a greater culture of privacy in the country.
Okay. Again, a reminder for questions. Another concern here, JJ, is that the recent episodes, Cambridge Analytica and so on, Facebook, would or are expected to lead to more regulation on social media and the internet. And some are concerned, particularly those who were at this crest, the forefront of the internet and the World Wide Web, that their freedoms will be taken away from them. What is your opinion regarding that concern?
This is the reason why, one of the reasons why we have a data privacy law. Because data privacy law is actually, it's like an entryway, it's like yung entry drug. Because it's a starting point for worse things. So one of the things that the data that is protected is, say, political beliefs. That's sensitive personal information. Because if that's the entry point for, say, a government, right, an administration to take action against you, knowing that these are your political beliefs. And you know what? Privacy is really about freedom. Can you imagine if, for example, you know that the government keeps track of all the books that you borrow in the library and all the books that you buy, right? Would you then borrow a book on, say, Marxism? You will stop, di ba? You think, this is not popular, so I won't do it. So that's a restriction on your freedom. So it's really about freedom. But the thing about Filipinos, I believe, we understand that there are certain things that we have to sacrifice a bit of our privacy if there's something in it for us. And we do that all the time. In fact, you did it today, and you do it every day, right? What did we do when we entered this building? You gave up all you allowed them to to x-ray everything that's in your pockets, and to even search you physically, right? That's an invasion of your privacy. But we accept that because we understand that that's necessary for our own physical safety. So we need to find that balance. We need to find that balance. But I think people need to understand that when they're giving up their privacy and they're giving up their freedom, in a sense, in a very real sense, they're doing that in exchange for something that benefits them.
Yes, even if originally the internet was conceived to be free from regulation, so to speak, or government intervention?
So I will disagree with that because the history of the internet was that the reason why there was no central control was for its stability. In other words, the internet was invented, was a way for the US government to make sure that the systems could talk to each other in the event of a nuclear war. So if sakali LA went, Los Angeles went up, the rest of the network continued to operate. So they needed something decentralized. The effect of that, including the fact that they had no identification protocols as part of the interneting technology, meant that it's difficult for somebody to regulate. But we have discovered, right? We know that it is possible to regulate, and there's an entire country with 1 billion people that regulate internet by the government requiring all providers to locate their servers physically in government-owned and controlled data centers. And this is China, the Great Firewall of China. And you can argue that that's a good strategy because without the Great Firewall of China, would there be Baidu? Would there be Tencent? Would these services be as big as they are if Google came in and took over the market, if Facebook came in and took over the market? The only companies now that have the financial capacity to challenge the Googles and the Facebooks, right, are Chinese companies. There are things that you can do to regulate the internet.
A related question. If you provided your personal details to an app that is hosted in another country, say Germany or even China, and they violate your privacy, how will the Data Privacy Act of the Philippines protect you?
So the law says that if you're a Filipino citizen, anyone in the world that processes the information of Filipino citizens will be covered by the Data Privacy Act. And this is why the National Privacy Commission sent a letter to Mark Zuckerberg requiring him to comply, to give information about what data was disclosed about Filipino citizens. Apparently, there's a page on Facebook, you need to look for it, where you can download all the data that they have about you. So you click to request it, and apparently it takes them some time to respond to you. I requested, I have not heard back for I think it's been about 3 weeks, but I guess there was a surge of requests because of the Cambridge Analytica situation.
Okay, another question. When we use Moodle for e-learning, in what situations can we possibly violate the Data Privacy Act? Is Moodle compliant with the DPA?
So the software by and of itself, it's hard to say whether it's compliant or non-compliant because what matters is how the institution itself uses the system and whether you get consents in place. I'm not sure, because so ako I don't recall now. I'm trying to remember it's a long time kasi when I signed up for UVLE. So I don't recall that they had me sign a privacy policy, and I don't recall that that this is an integral part of Moodle. But so this is a situation where the school needs to take the initiative to put their own consent forms out there, put out the data privacy notices to get the consent of the students. And the data that you're holding about the students is their academic activity, their grades actually. So my view, actually, grades are personal information, and you can't disclose that without the consent of the data subject.
Yes, grades, as well as, we encounter exchanges in discussion forums that are sometimes hostile. And I wonder if that should be, if a policy should govern that sort of behavior.
Opo. So the number one kind of cybercrime that we have, would it surprise you, is the number one form of cybercrime that we have is cyber libel. And it usually takes the form of siniraan niya ako sa Facebook. So that's usually cyber libel. I think what's going to happen in the future is that we will see a lot more people saying, wait, you're violating my Data Privacy Act, and then my data privacy rights, and they will initiate criminal action on that basis. This can happen in situations where, say, if you have a labor union, and the labor union might say that management is violating data privacy rights, or you have a group of parents, for example, that are very militant against the administration. They may use non-compliance as a way to say that, oh, you're violating the data privacy rights of the students. So this is unfortunately, because it is a crime under the Data Privacy Act, because data privacy violations are criminal offenses, there's that potential for harassment. unfortunately, can be weaponized for those purposes, not necessarily related to privacy. And whether or not the case is strong, you still have to spend money and effort and time and reputational loss in order to defend yourself. Even though in the end you will win the case, there's still some very real costs associated. That's why, so just for your own protection, you should try to be as compliant as possible.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Attorney J.J. Dissini
Thank you, po.
sharing with us his expertise and insights on the Data Privacy Act. Thank you very much, J.J. Our regards to Owens this week.